so Canada accept his trust?
Nothing extremely special. If it's in the final focus, it should be in the summary. I don't think there's anything else especially unorthodox about it. That isn't better.
Yeah. I mean, clean extensions, I'm gonna vote on the more well-warranted, like, clearly weighed issue that's left at the end of the round. So be very explicit on why your warrant's true. Just, obviously you guys are good, but like, an author doesn't make something true. Explain why the author got to that conclusion. And I will not call a card unless I'm explicitly told to. So, and I like try my best to strictly abide by that. So if at the end of the day something's unclear on the flow, yeah, I'll resolve it the best I can on the flow, and that's it. I will not call your evidence.
We have 1 second actually.
Oh, and keep your own track. Like, I'll keep some track of it, but try to keep your own.
Go ahead.
Tim Reddy. Tim and I negate contention one state collapse when chain of Rice University statistically finds, quote, that U.S. troops are correlated with a decrease in the troop level of the host state. The presence of U.S. troops is not resulting in a large increase in security as the host state itself is weakening. In Iraq specifically, Huron of Stanford University confirms that, quote, the more we do, the less will be done by parties in the area who the United States wants to build up their own capabilities. If the only good way to get rid of ISIS in the long run is to let local actors deal with it. This is because, as Mossy, the International Business Times finds, quote, the military superiority of the U.S. doesn't count for very much. Counterinsurgency is mostly political, so it's actually better to use local forces on the ground. Thus, Nasseri of the Rio News finds that because, quote, the U.S. has made Iraq dependent for its security and defense, Iraq is vulnerable to all possible threats from the outside because it can't defend itself. Mueller of the International Studies Quarterly empirically impacts that, quote, the likelihood of militarily dependent developing democracies being able to maintain stability was 13%, while the likelihood of stability among developing democracies that were not dependent was 78%. This trend occurs across the entire region. Traub of the Center for International Cooperation explains that, quote, Obama has said that the United States will henceforward work through partners when it comes to counterterrorism, and it is precisely the American abdication that necessitated this new Arab activism. The result was, quote, the Arab League creating a response force of 40,000 military professionals from a variety of nations and will be adopted in a couple of weeks. Insofar as U.S. withdrawal has elicited regional action, the trade-off is clear that it is the U.S. that reduces regional commitments. This is problematic as Connery of the Cato Institute notes that, quote, states in the region have stronger economic and political ties with warring parties and a better understanding of the conflict. Comparatively, quote, American support for military action tends to decline dramatically at the prospect of the occupation that will entail casualties. Erosion of public support leads to the erosion of congressional support, resulting in serious divisions within the government directing intervention. The military is virtually assured of failure, end quote. Contention 2, human rights abuses. These occur in 3 different ways. First, the blind eye. Hassan of Foreign Policy writes that, quote, the operation last summer in Amerily, U.S. forces turned a blind eye to the abuse of conduct of militias, as the militias targeted minorities in the area. Militias and Iraqi security forces burned Sunni villages to the ground, destroyed homes, and looted entire villages. When we can protect people but we don't, they blame us for their suffering. Second, collective punishment. The MHRI writes in the last invasion, quote, the U.S. applied the method of collective punishment of civilians with the pretense that armed groups live among them. The U.S. bombed the city of Fallujah, killing more than 1,200 people, while women and elderly and children were being killed and families were driven out of their homes. And third, Texan of the University of Utah writes that by invigorating corrupt governments, quote, a supportive intervention increases extrajudicial killing by 130%, disappearances by 239%, torture by 66%, and political imprisonment by 70%. The impact is twofold. First, lost soft power. The Center for Balkan Peace notes that, quote, formidable attacks will become even more difficult if charges of human rights abuses undermine America's military standing. Opponents of the U.S. exploit war crime charges to undermine America's credibility in military operations, and allies will find it difficult to support missions. In order to build coalitions and deploy troops effectively, the United States must have credibility as a protector of human rights. Nye Harvard confirms this importance, writing that, quote, some transnational issues cannot be managed without the help of other countries, including infectious diseases, stability of global financial markets, international trade, WMDs, international crime, and terrorism. Second, increased terrorism. Piazza, the UNC, writes that, quote, state violation of human rights makes terrorist appeals for support more effective. Brutal treatment of non-combatants by the state can facilitate mobilization efforts of militants, radicalizing formerly passive populations, and foster conditions under which ethnic, religious, or social groups experience communal discrimination, constructing collective grievances against the state. These are ripe for exploitation by terrorist groups, enhancing popular support for anti-system violence. Thus, he finds that reducing, quote, physical integrity rates by 1 unit out of 8 increases the number of terrorist attacks by between 17 and 40%. In fact, Alexander the Washington Post finds, quote, that at least half of our losses and casualties in Iraq have come because of our program on detainee abuse. The number of U.S. soldiers who have died because of our torture policy is close to the number of lives lost on 9/11. Thus, we need
Possible, can you see the page?
Can you like flash it to you so you can use his laptop?
Yeah, sure.
It's more factors HRNA.
Well, what's the flash drive called?
The dock in the flash drive is called more factors HRNA.
What
Can you stay here for 1 second?
Yeah, like just
Just back
yeah.
More factors.
Yeah.
Thank you. Starting prep now.
Yemen, where's this Iraq? It never says Iraq. It's talking about Yemen and Syria. Okay, yeah.
Thank you. So that was 24 seconds, you say? You guys want to write that down? It's your choice.
Everybody ready? Sam and I affirm the resolution. Intention 1, undermining ISIL support. Patrick Coburn documents in his book, The Rise of Islamic State, while ISIL's threat is dependent on the support of Iraq's 5 million Sunnis. Nor Mullis of the Wall Street Journal explains that although many Sunnis personally dislike ISIL, they still support it because they view them as convenient battlefield allies against a repressive Shia regime. The U.S. can prevent this by organizing the Sunni tribes. Colonel Richard Welch explains that the tribal forces can penetrate and saturate areas, and U.S. forces will try to help them with coordination. The U.S. were to say privately, will support you, the Sunni tribes will rise up, and you'll see ISIL gone in a few months. There is precedence for success. Kenneth Pollock of the Brookings Institute reports how in 2007, U.S. ground troops helped Sunnis expel al-Qaeda in Iraq in the Anbar Awakening and set Iraq on a path towards political stability. However, Colonel Derek Harvey explains that if the U.S. does not commit ground troops, the U.S. risks yielding primacy to Iran, threatening any Sunni Arab awakening. Pollock explains how the Iraqi government refuses to negotiate with the Sunnis because they don't believe they are organized enough. Sinan Adnan of the Institute of the Study of War explains the Iraqi government must reconnect with Iraq's disenfranchised Sunni population, but effective anti-ISIL program is to take hold within Sunni areas. Contention 2, preventing atrocities. We observe that preventing mass atrocities are in the best interest of the U.S. for 2 reasons. First, it is a moral imperative, as Adam Mellion of the University of Rhode Island explains, protecting universally established human rights constitutes a perfect duty, with a binding and enforceable obligation. This means that preventing mass atrocities is a moral imperative of the U.S. and a priori to other concerns. Second, from a utilitarian perspective, as Obama himself has argued, preventing mass atrocities and genocide is a core national security interest and a core moral responsibility of the U.S. Our security is effective when masses of civilians are slaughtered, refugees flow across borders, and murders wreak havoc on regional stabilities and livelihoods. America's reputation suffers, and our ability to bring about change is constrained when we are perceived as idle in the face of mass atrocities and genocide. Research bears this out. Daniel Milton of West Point finds that changing from the 25th to the 75th percentile refugees increases transnational terror by 91.8%, and Ayaan Salehan of the University of North Texas finds that every 100,000 refugees increasing the probability of state collapse by 85%. This is uniquely problematic because, as James Piazza of UNC writes, failing states have 10 to 15 times more transnational terror than stable states. The situation in Iraq and Syria certainly meets the threshold of destruction. Marissa Esmir, the Migration Policy Institute, estimates that 3 million people are internally displaced in Iraq. Peter Beinhardt of the Atlantic says that the Yazidis are at risk of being wiped off the face of the earth. The Minority Rights Group International writes that ISIS committed summary executions, sexual violence, and torture that amount to crimes against humanity and possibly genocide. External intervention is important to stemming the killings. As John Western of Foreign Affairs writes, even when civil wars do not stop right away, external interventions often mitigates violence against civilians. This is because being aimed at preventing mass atrocities often force would-be killers to divert resources away from slaughtering civilians and towards defending themselves. This phenomenon means that even when interventions fail to end civil wars or resolve factional differences immediately, they can still protect civilians. Matthew Crane of Worcester confirms this empirically, finding external intervention with just a single actor reduces the probability of killing escalating by 17%. Airstrikes are insufficient. As Richard Lim of the National Security Watch explains, reliance primarily on air power is not likely to be sufficient to degrade and destroy ISIL, but especially since it has acquired large swaths of territory. He furthers that the effectiveness of air power declines as ISIL targets inevitably disperse. Use of ground forces can help force the enemy to mass together to defend themselves on their territory, increasing their vulnerability to attacks from the air. Seth Jones of Brand corroborates even unsuccessful offensive actions that force terrorist units or cells to stay perpetually on the move to avoid destruction reduce their capability. Constant pursuit makes it dangerous for them to rest, and even the threat of military force may be critical to exhaust terrorists and deter their state sponsors. Matthew Dunn, former MI6 counterterrorism operative, concludes, the difference in combat effectiveness between Western troops and ISIL is stark. If they confronted each other in Iraq and northern Syria, ISIL could be beaten in weeks, if not or months. Thus we affirm.
Actually, sometime before my rebuttal, can I just see like the thing that says that they can be and
Yo, do you want it now?
I don't really mind particularly.
I have it up.
Okay.
Here you go.
You mind if I keep it in the drawer?
I mean, we can't actually deny it, but it's possible. Could you turn it as soon as possible?
Yeah, would the judges be okay if I like pass it back to them in the middle of the crossbar?
Lovely, thank you.
Oh wait, are you guys trying to prep?
No, you were.
Oh no.
You guys
No,
ready?
no, I was gonna pass it back to you.
Ready for crossbar?
Okay, we're ready.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that's going to be hard.
All three
Take 10
judges?
from everyone, or?
We can.
Okay.
All three judges ready?
Yeah.
Can a country be morally obligated to kill its citizens?
Or are we kill its own citizens? I mean, the death penalty, I guess. Some people can contend.
Okay, do you have a question?
When you talk specifically about other troops pulling out,
Yeah,
you talk about this 40, or the troops pulling out would be the 40,000 strong force.
yeah.
It has like the 40,000 strong force, which is like the alliance of like what, Egypt, United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
Have they like made a public statement saying they would pull out if Americans come in?
No.
Or is there a proof of this, just general
We
statistics?
established through the Traub card that there's a clear trade-off between American presence in the
Is-
region
is-
and the creation of these forces.
Okay,
like
is the
Europe.
Traub card talking generally about like in cross history trends or specific to the Iraq
He
situation?
says like, wait, I don't know, you tell, like, it's specific, like, he says American abdication is what allows things like the Arab League to rise, and the opposite will happen.
Wait, no, I'm asking, has there been any indication by the organization, the 40,000 troops said, if US troops go in, we will not?
I mean, if you wanna look at history, it's happened in places Iraq, as we established with the first half of our contention. Now, can I ask you a
What happened in
question?
Iraq?
Like, they're heavily dependent on us, as we read at the
So
bottom
what
of the
happened
first half of our
with
contention.
the other troops going in?
Like,
Wait.
they can't protect themselves against external security
Wait,
threats.
didn't the fact that they're like, we gave them troops, give them the only meaningful hope of ever holding them off? Because by themselves, they seem to be pretty weak.
Sure, we give them short-term hope, but now in the long term, they can't withstand any external.
Would they have been
That's the
stronger
issue.
without our arms, are you saying? Would they be stronger without
I'd
our
argue that in the
arms?
long term, we've set them up for the 6 times chance of like a failed state as we established at the bottom of our contention.
Okay,
So
what is,
question?
okay, sure.
So the resolution's in like the present tense, the status quo, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so that six-fold increase, right? We tend to support states that are already pretty weak, right?
I guess so.
So
Ron.
how do you know that that's causal, that it's making them weak, and it's not this kind of states we tend to support are those that are already predisposed towards weakness?
I mean, I guess like we can show you the study, but like insofar as like we show you that like holistically they find they're 6 times more likely to fail.
Okay.
Like you like.
I'm saying the fact that we're supporting it is not making them 6 times more likely. We're saying we tend to support states
do
that
that.
are more likely to fail already.
Okay,
You have a
can I ask
question?
Yeah, sure. So you talk about like America's reputation at the
Yeah.
like, is that like, okay, so like, I guess first of all, to clarify, is that like the only impact you're deriving that you like actually link to U.S. security interests?
No,
from
what we
genocide?
tell you is that genocides create refugee crises, which results in attacks against the United States.
Okay.
We also tell you if we have to act
Okay.
That's what we say after
So
every
for
genocide,
reputation-
and it's about time we act.
So for
It's moral.
reputation, is America's reputation good right now? I just want to clarify.
It's mixed, depends where you are. Like, in certain parts of the world, they like us.
Okay. Wait. So like, when you say like overall, are you trending more towards like a good reputation or a bad reputation?
I'd say it's pretty complicated.
Okay, good question.
Sure. So when you talk about like the Shia militias,
Yes.
if you negate the resolution, what happens to the Shia militias?
What happens to the Shia militias?
Yeah.
I mean, like, what we're told, you tell me.
Well, where Sam's going to bring it up from the Capia borders is if you do negate the resolution, the Shia militias run the show. If the affirmative is the only one giving a probability, being able to rein them in, regulate them, make sure the human rights
Someone
abuses
plays that's
do
not
not
in the
occur.
long run.
Okay. Yeah. I'm certain.
Thank you. Using minute 01. Alright, everyone's ready? All of them? And all three judges? Let's start with how you're bringing around. There's going to be three distinct ways that you're going to be able to negate the resolution. The first comes from the concession that he makes in Crossfire, which is that the resolution is in the present tense and therefore they're defending the status quo that we have to deploy troops right now. Because we're going to come up here and say that ISIS is weakening in the status quo. That means two things. One, if ISIS is weakening, it probably isn't going to be a threat in the future, not linked back to U.S. interests. But second of all, if they're declining right now, that means if anything, we shouldn't intervene right now because it'll be an easier fight later on. They have to defend why we have to intervene immediately. That being said, there's going to be a lot of reasons why they're failing. Firstly, you can look at Fordham of NPR, who tells you that the morale and supplies of ISIS are falling from the toils of war. It's going to be easier to attack them later. Second of all, into Giovanni of Newsweek. Giovanni finds that the economy within ISIS territory is actually plummeting because they're paying all their fighters, but they're running out of money, which means they aren't going to be able to control their territory for very much longer. That's why the BBC finds that they've actually lost 25% of their land, and qualitatively, they've lost important places like Aleppo while only gaining random farmland. The second way you're going to be able to negate is we can de-link them back from United States interests, which I'm going to do later on. And third of all, if we can prove a long-term structural harm to the country we're intervening in, the long-term structural harms are going to be the ones that are the hardest to reverse, so you weigh them the most. Let's look to contention one support. They're basically talking about how we're going to cause the Shia, cause the Sunni tribes to fight back. First, you can look to Knights of Columbia, who tells you that this is happening right now because ISIS is attacking the Sunni tribes with suicide attacks. So a lot of these tribes are now going back against ISIS. And Knight says that this is a reason why ISIS is falling apart right now. But second of all, they're not even topical. Their advocacy is all these we help with coordination and everything. But the DoD defines a ground combat troop as somebody who goes in with a crew service weapon, goes after the enemy, and attempts to kill them. I don't think that falls under coordination. They're not topical. De-link them right there. But then they talk about how in the 2007 this worked really well against AQI. But ISIS is way stronger than AQI was. They have way more members. They don't prove solvency to the current scenario. But also there's going to be two reasons why we aren't actually going to be able to trigger this Sunni awakening for the aren't going to be able to actually convince them to deploy more troops. The first is that realize that we promised them stability when we did this in 2007, and we clearly failed. They don't have a reason to trust us. But second of all, Newsweek tells you that they specifically don't trust us because they see us as cooperating with Iran right now. So next, realize that they also don't tell you why troops are actually the bright line into actually getting the Sunnis to cooperate with us, so they don't even make the link necessary for them to actually gain the impact. Now let's move to contention 2, where they talk about atrocities. This first argument is about moral obligation. Look to Morgenthau. He tells you that states don't actually, can't have moral obligations because they are not moral actors. They always use pragmatism, which is what the United States has always done in the past. They don't tell you how, second of all, they don't tell you why a moral obligation is specifically corroborated with America's best interest because morality doesn't have any real-world impacts back on the social contract of American citizens. But third of all, remember what Oliver tells you. You can't be morally obligated to kill your own citizen because you violate that same deontological morality. Sending U.S. troops to die isn't going to be causing this. But their second argument is going to be about refugees. Now first, they link this all back to an increase in transnational terrorism. First of all, transnational terrorism does not mean attacks on US homeland. So they never actually tell you that there's actually going to be any impact on the United States. But second of all, let's think about this logically. If ISIS is committing atrocities right now against these people and displacing them, they're going to be retaliating, if anything, against ISIS. There is no reason for them to attack the United States if we're not even causing what's causing them to be displaced in the first place. The only thing that will actually cause them to attack us is if we're the ones causing the violence that makes them displaced because we intervene. That being said, realize that the internal link on this entire contention is stability. If we can prove to you that ISIS retaliation is going to outweigh, you're going to negate. First, look to Choi at the University of Illinois that finds that a pro-government intervention with troops increases the amount of suicide bombings by 347%. Second, Neumayer of the London School of Economics finds that a standard deviation in troops increases terrorism by 24%. Leal of the International Organization Foundation studied 286 insurgencies and found that troops decrease the chance of success by 59%. And Regan of the World Bank finds that an intervention increases the chance that the conflict goes on for 4 years by 23%. Finally, their solvency at the bottom is about how they say that the troops will solve in weeks. The problem here is that that's predicated on the falsehood that troop power is what determines their effectiveness. But if you look to Mossy, we give you on her case, she tells you that the main part that you need is legitimacy, not that. Second of all, David Sobek at the University of Copenhagen finds that military capability doesn't defeat insurgencies because they don't help legitimacy. Thank you.
Actually, no, I want to see that. Choi.
Which one?
Choi.
Joy?
Yeah.
And Lyle, the part where it's ground.
You want that right now?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, possibly.
These are cards.
Oh,
Yeah. It's choice. First one's choice, second one's choice.
Alright, it's right now. It's safe, right? Fourth occupiers. Yeah, right. So how many was that used? 10.
What can we?
I think 3.
It's not about 20 quick left.
It's 76 used in that.
You. Oh, I.
Cool. So you guys ready?
Yep.
Well, you ready? Ready. So I'm gonna do an overview. I think it makes more sense to put it on my side of the flow, but they have like a minute long overview, so I'm not too sure. So I guess you can put it on their side too. Whatever works for you. My opponents are fond of reading a lot of cards saying that terrorism increases after the United States intervenes. The problem with all those is things like Choi, Neumeyer, Lyle, Reagan, their entire card dump. The problem with every single piece of those is they're all victim to selection bias, that the United States typically only intervenes in conflicts as they're escalating. The reason why that's really important is because if terrorism increases after the United States intervenes, that's because of the natural trajectory of the conflict, not because of any United States actions. However, with James Piazza of UNC, who they even themselves cite, says that if you prevent a failed state, you're preventing an outcome which you see 10 to 15 times more terrorism. That means that even if terrorism increases after the United States intervenes, to the point where that's significantly less than what would happen if we didn't intervene at all, means that any probability in the reduction of failed states constitutes acting in the United States' best interest. Now go to detention 1, which talks about state collapse. First, they give you this Mahan analysis, say U.S. troops decrease troops in the host country. We agree. However, it's not going to be the Iraqi troops who are going to decrease in the host country because they have a set size of their army. Rather, what's going to happen is it's going to be the Shiite militias who are going to decrease their troops in the country, which is going to be a net positive when they themselves can see the Shia militias are really, really bad. Then they give you this Q-round analysis saying that less is going to be done by other parties in the region. However, the opposite is actually true. What Anthony Blinken of the CSIS explains that when the United States go in for the Iraq War, other forces went in too because the United States broke the ice, and that means other forces are going to go in. It's actually going to be opposite what they're telling you. Then they say other local forces are going to be able to solve. You know, who are these local forces? The Kurds are willing to take out Kurdistan, back Kurdistan, but they're not going to be able to go into the Sunni heartlands. The alternative, the Shia militias, they themselves tell you are really bad. These local options that they're talking about are not a viable option. Then they give you a Mueller analysis saying dependence is really, really bad. There's a ton of problems with this. First off, is something my brother alluded to across our, which is this 100% a correlation with it. That the United States typically only intervenes in weak states. It's not because they're dependent, it's a simple correlation. The second big problem with this is that even if you buy their analysis, the alternative in the negative world is not in the dependent free Iraq. Rather, it's Iraq that's dependent on Iran, who back the Shia militias. You look to the neg world, it's going to be much worse than what happened in the Af world. Then go on to when they talk about the Arab League. But if you actually call the analysis about the Arab League, what it specifically says is talking about Yemen, which is what the Saudi Arabia is currently doing against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. It's not about Iraq at all. But second and most importantly, never do they say the Arab League would be likely to pull out if we did not intervene. Without that analysis, they give you no offense. Now on to the second contention, which talks about human rights abuses. First, they talk about how we're turning a blind eye to these militias. The first big problem is just look what the alternative is in the status quo. We are actively in the status quo turning a blind eye to the militias. If that's it, as a result, their impact should be non-unique. But if anything, it's actually going to be offensive for our side. Look, Peter Norland in the New York Times explains is that right now already we have some leverage over the Shia militias because we're sending forces into the area. In fact, we called them out of Ramadi, which is the capital of Anbar. However, that leverage is going to increase a lot more according to Slate if we send ground troops in the region. So if anything, we depower these Shia militias that are so bad as they're saying. Then they give you this analysis talk about collective punishment. But keep in mind, this analysis is based 100% on the Iraq War. We are not advocating for an Iraqi invasion, nor is that likely again because of Obama's statement. As a result, it's not going to be offense. But most importantly, when they tell you the collective punishment, they give you the example of Fallujah, where we bombed Fallujah. Keep in mind, again, we're not going to be mass bombing cities. But even if you don't buy that, remember that's airstrikes that we're doing in the status quo. So the alternative doesn't solve. Then they give you this analysis that talks about how we're going to be losing soft power. One, they give you no quantification how much soft power is going to be derailed, what projects are going to be derailed. Without that, there's no way for you to weigh this argument. But second, and most importantly, they tell you very specifically at the bottom of this that protection of human rights is essential to having our soft power. That's exactly the entire basis of our second contention, which talks about stopping atrocities. This is really important to the point where they drop the Western analysis, which is our entire solvency for the contention. Don't let them respond to it again, which is that if we attack ISIS, ISIS can no longer focus on committing human rights abuses and committing atrocities, means they're less likely to perpetuate this genocide. If you believe human rights abuses, preventing them are crucial to the United States' interest in U.S. soft power, that's a very compelling reason for you to affirm. Then they tell you there's going to be an increase in terrorism because we're seeing these human rights abuses. Remember, the human rights abuses that they're talking about stem from the Shia militias. They're the ones who are perpetuating the Shia militias, because in the status quo, the Shia militias are the ones getting power. We're the only ones who give you that probability of reducing the Shia militias, and that's why we urge you to affirm. Thank you.
Back for a question? All three done, okay? So you talk about how like the alternative to sending our troops to like turn a blind eye on the ground is to like just never intervene, and then you say why is that also like turning a blind eye?
I'd say that the alternative is the status quo.
No, yeah, but here's the thing. What we're saying is that we're not talking about the status quo. This is really important. What we're saying is what happened in the American League was U.S. troops went in with Iraqi troops. The Iraqi troops like hung people from cell phone towers, and the Americans just stood by.
American?
Yes.
When?
Last summer.
The United States had ground troops in Iraq last summer.
We had like
You
U.S.
pulled out
combat
20.
advisors with them, and they didn't do anything. But this is the important thing, right? If we are never, can I just please explain this? If we are never deployed, then they will just like blame the militias. Wait, but if we are deployed and we just sit by and let it happen, then they would blame us, right?
Two problems. One, that can give you from the Northern analysis, we aren't just sitting by and doing it. So that's what specifically we've already shown our intention to rein them in. But second, and most importantly, let's just look what's happening in Iraq right now. What was happening in the negative world, are we doing anything to stop the Shia militias?
Right now, the Shia militias.
Yes.
You yourself said we just like check them back.
No, in the status quo, with like your advocacy, are we able to stop the Shia militias?
Not necessarily. Why does that
Okay.
matter?
Because when you're telling us there's all these harms to the Shia militias, and your side is letting the Shia militias perpetuate their abuses, that's not going to be a good thing.
Yeah, no, but the difference is we tell you that we only inspire more retaliation when we
I understand your position.
For instance,
Mind if I ask
wait,
you a
wait,
question?
this is really important. What would the Shia militias do if you
Like they would do, if they were to dispute, their gains would be checked.
How about this?
Because the
No,
reason
what
why
if they said they will do?
they said what they
What if
do,
they said they will do?
nothing.
No, they said they'll attack the United States.
Yeah, I'm aware. Yes. They
Yes.
did say that, and then they backed off it. So I guess that canceled that.
Wait, because the head of a 500,000 man Shia militia said, I will attack the United States
Yes,
if they enter the
I'm
country.
very aware of what al-Sadr said, and it was quote when you actually look at the analysis about it, he backs off, and it's just an idle boast.
Okay, I would like to see that evidence. Because in
Sure.
fact, if you look to the last war in Iraq, they did fight us.
Yes, and what the difference is between the Iraq War and now is the role of Iran. Right now, Iran has its interest in the region because of this nuclear deal. They don't want to jeopardize it. As a result, they're calling them off. That's why it's the difference between the Iraq War and now.
That's the only difference between now
I
and
mean,
the
there's
Iraq
a
war.
ton of differences. That's just the main difference.
Okay, no, wait. Wait, you just said like the main difference here is that like it's air raid, right? But
Yeah,
then you
the main-
responded to our argument by saying like the troops aren't going to commit human rights abuses because this isn't 2003. But why would tactics change?
I'm very confused.
Okay, against our first warrant saying that U.S. troops commit collective punishment against civilians, you just said, oh, well, this isn't Iraq 2003.
Yes.
Why? How have our tactics changed?
We're not doing a full-scale occupation, surge, invasion,
This wasn't
destroyed, all shock and awe
No,
strategy.
what happened in Fallujah was we went in and tried to root out the militants. Isn't that what exactly we would be doing? if
No,
we were...
what you tell me in Fallujah so we just bombed the heck out of them.
No. We like destroyed the entire place.
But
Like, it
quote-
wasn't just
I have a
bombs.
quote here
Like,
that
we
says
also
bombs.
we also drove people out of their houses.
Yes,
And like abused
that's
them.
called an occupation, which you're not advocating for, nor is Obama calling for.
Which
Do you wanna see, they're not gonna.
Yeah, they're not going to attack.
They're illogical. It's highlighted.
Thank you.
Do you have 9 seconds remaining?
Yes.
Opponent's ready. Tim ready. All three judges. As an off-time match, it's overused for 3 reasons in reason rebuttal. Starting off with the overview, remember every empirical region in the round explicitly concludes is predicated on the falsehood that military superiority is the most important factor in the conflict. But remember, what Sobek tells you is when you use military superiority, it looks like you're beating down the little guy, and that actually entrenches conflict. Don't look to any of their empirics. With that in mind, there's 3 ways we negate that Tim's establishes in rebuttal. First, if we prove that they're falling apart, the status quo never touched upon the rebuttal. Extend Fordham and Giovanni, morale, the economy, and supplies are going down. Extend BBC that tells you they lost 25% of their land and are only making gains in like unimportant rural areas, and extend Knights that takes out their first contention that tells you Sunni tribes are already flipping against them. The second way you vote next is we prove like if we deal with U.S. interests. Remember for terrorism, Troy tells you a 347% increase in terrorism because we interview. Remember for moral obligations, Dow tells you that we operate mainly off of pragmatism, and you can't be morally obligated to kill your own citizen. And for reputation, there's no terminal impacts to look at in today's round. With that in mind, the third way we win is we prove long-term structural harms. That mainly comes through human rights. So for our first word, turning the blind eye, what we're telling you is if we go directly into the immediate area and we're not doing anything as we did last summer in Maryland, that's going to increase anti-American sentiment. But second of all, for collective punishment, remember they say it's like they're going to do it differently this time. That collective punishment came from urban fighting, which you're obviously going to do if you vote out in today's round. And third of all, this is most important. They completely drop text in that tells you that when you intervene in an area, you institutionalize corruption within the government. This is the closest impact to like the long-term structural changes, which creates a 103% increase in extrajudicial killings and 70% increase in torture. Now remember when it comes to Shia militias, their evidence says that they're boasting, but didn't say that they're actually going to back down. Look to the Huffington Post that says the Shia militias are actually going to fight us. When it comes to the Sunni awakening, remember, it's not unique. Knights says that they're already flipping right now. The Department of Defense tells you that it's not topical because combat advisors are not ground troops. And remember, one, they're not going to trust us. We then established stability last time. And second of all, Newsom says that they think we're cooperating with Iran, so you can't look to that. When it comes to genocide, remember, turn refugees because they're actually going to retaliate against ISIS. They give you no reason why they're not going to retaliate against the United States. Obviously, if you're displaced by ISIS, you're going to retaliate against ISIS. And it extends so back and tells you that this military superiority is not going to work. It's going to entrench the conflict. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be taking some Korean prep. Another 18 seconds. So that adds up to 44. Go ahead. I'm going to address their overview.
Okay. They say that ISIS is collapsing the status quo. For one, we can't wait for later, because while they're collapsing, they're committing a genocide. We need to act now. Second, Zach Beauchamp of Vox tells you that though what we've taken over the status quo is just the low-hanging fruit. But that means if you ever want a meaningful defeat of ISIS, we need to intervene. The fact that they're shrinking the status quo is insufficient justification to avoid intervention. That said, the first reason you vote for the pro is preventing atrocities. The Migration Policy Research Institute says there is a genocide going right now. The Yazidis are at risk of being wiped off the face of the earth. They read you say that we do not have moral obligation because nations don't act morally. They don't act right now, but we tell you that they ought to act it. Melanie says it's a perfect duty and it's an enforceable obligation. You will in best interest to act in a moral way. They say that the transatlantic refugees doesn't lead to attack the United States. We tell you it creates a hostile environment that enables other groups to rise. The example would be Afghanistan in the 90s, the failed state enabled environment that led to 9/11. They read you a bunch of studies that talk about things. First choices, but the problem with the Troy evidence is it says if you do specific counterterrorism operations, it decreases violence. If you use Neumeier, doesn't have causality. If you do Lyle is contingent on being an occupation, and Reagan assumes that there's interveners on both sides. None of their studies make any sense. Now what we tell you is first, the solvency comes from Western, which says when you use American forces, it forces ISIS to use resources to defend themselves, and less on mass killing civilians, which is the warrant for Crane, which is a 17% reduction in killing. We outweigh in a couple ways. First, we tell you to prevent a failed state, which we tell you from Piazza is a 10 to 15-fold increase in terrorism. Second, they're telling you that our soft power is contingent on stopping human rights abuses, stopping a genocide is the best way to do this. And third, it's our moral obligation that is a priori to their case. Now let's go into their own case. They talk a lot about Shia militias. Recognize, first, in the negative world, there are no checks on the militias. That means the human rights abuses occur. In contrast, in the affirmative world, we get the leverage to bring them in. The example is the airstreams give us enough leverage to get the militias out of Anbar. We use ground troops who can get them out of the entire country. We tell you that's enough to rein them in again. They talk about a lot of human rights abuses. Recognize those are contingent on the same tactics we used during the Iraq War. We are not advocating, nor is Obama advocating a reinvasion of Iraq. That does not occur. They talk about corruption, but corruption only occurs because the Iraqi politicians can justify in the name of protecting security. We solve for security, we solve for corruption. And for all these reasons, we negate. Oh, we affirm. Negate those.
So, for the selection bias that you put at the top of our case, would you say that for most of these unstable states that you feel are subject to the selection bias, is most of the fighting within the country or anti-American?
Sorry, I can't really hear.
Okay, yeah. So when it comes to the selection bias, and you say that these unstable countries inherently have more terrorism, is most of the terrorism focused within the country or is it anti-American?
Piazza says transnational, so that would include anti-American.
Wait. Transnational terrorism just means it crosses borders, right?
Yes,
right.
Why does that inherently mean it's going to go after the United States?
Because when we look just recent history, right? We didn't invade Afghanistan, we still saw Taliban help shelter Al Qaeda, right? Just look to recent history. Transnational normally means anti-Western.
I think an example.
Why would these people who are being displaced by ISIS to blame the United States?
This is based on a misunderstanding here, which I think is where the confusion is arising. We're not saying the refugees are the ones who are causing the terrorism. Refugees generally aren't the terrorists. What happens is that the refugees destabilize the host state, and that's where the terrorism arises.
And it creates an environment. For example, in Afghanistan, the failed state, what happened in the 90s is that created an environment where Al Qaeda could get in a foothold and they launched attack. Failed states have no security apparatus, which allows anti-American groups to set up a
For
stronghold.
terminal impact, the Piazza card, is he referring specifically to anti-American terrorism or just general
Transnational terrorism in the United States is the global
How much of
hegemon.
that transnational
Okay,
terrorism-
one
Just because of the
second. One
hegemon doesn't mean they
second.
automatically attack us.
No. As the global, we have a more obligation to enforce the global security. If not 100% of the, even if 100% of attacks are not aimed at the United States, we have an obligation to, in order to prevent the destruction of the global system, which occurs from increases in transnational terrorism, because the United States kind of benefits from the current international system.
No, you need to bring that back to the United States beyond just the.
Okay, our power and prestige is contingent on a stable global order, and that transnational terrorism threatens that stable global order.
Wait, how much? Wait. So how much is transnational terrorism threatening this global world
How do you
order?
measure
Because there have
that?
been safe havens before, right?
Yes, and they threatened our influence. Just as the safe haven in Afghanistan definitely harmed the United States when they sheltered Al Qaeda.
Wait, let's talk about this, right? Wait, in your first contention, you said if we could flip the tribes, they would be able to fix the Shia militias and all the problems we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, you have a question?
Sure. Yeah, so I'd like to ask you about something you keep bringing up right now, right? So when you tell us that in response to a couple of things you were saying, you're telling us choice, right? Increase in terrorism.
Yeah.
And cause result of intervention. What does he say about counterterrorism operations?
First of all, the Choi study we read is more recent. I'm pretty sure the counterterrorism operation comes from like, I think it's 2011.
I mean,
study- the
what
study you're about to
does
read-
Choi say though about counterterrorism, even your more recent one?
Even the more recent one, it says that a pro-government troop intervention increases
Right,
suicide
right.
by
So what Choi says
So
is
nation
general
building does
intervention.
fail. Our question
Wait, that
is,
isn't about
what
nation
about
building, it's about a
counterterrorism?
troop deployment.
Right.
What about
General
counterterrorism
troop-
specifically?
The point is, general troop
I would
deployment.
I would say that,
counterterrorism.
we have 9 seconds.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's tough.
Tony's ready?
Yeah.
Yep.
All three judges. Roadmap, just the 3 ways. The first way you negate is that if ISIS is weakening right now because it means that we shouldn't intervene in the status quo, we should intervene when they're weaker. He just responds by saying, oh, we need to go in and stop the atrocity right now. What we're saying is that we have a higher probability of actually stopping that atrocity if we go in later, if we prove that ISIS is weakening. And we clearly extend those cards. The first is Fordham and Giovanni, who tells you that they are internally failing, their economy is falling apart, and BBC tells you that they're losing 25% of their land. But the biggest one that they drop, and what he says in Grand Crossfire, is that the Sunni tribes can fix back all the problems that they describe. But they drop Knights, who tells you that the Sunni tribes are flipping in the status quo and fighting ISIS. That means that they themselves admit that the status quo is solving back their impacts. The second way you communicate is that they lose the threat to the United States. Remember Choi, and pro-government troop intervention increases the amount of terrorism by 347% because the internal link there is stability. They try and extend this like moral obligation argument on their second contention, but remember, one, states act pragmatically according to Morgenthau, and second of all, they can be obligated to kill their own citizens by sending them into a conflict. Don't weigh this idea of moral obligation. But then they talk about refugees, but remember, they will retaliate against ISIS. They impact this by transnational terrorism. They just say transnational terrorism, but they never impact it back to the United States. They never prove why that equates to United States' best interest. But then the third way is long-term structural abuses. This is huge. Throughout this entire round, and don't let them respond to a final moment, they drop Pexin, who tells you that we institutionalize human rights abuses within the Iraqi government by giving them all this power, by giving them this intervention. That means that when we tell you, I told you at the top of my rebuttal, that you want to look to the long-term structural harms, structurally changing Iraq to be more abusive to its people is the type of thing that's going to increase terrorism, according to Piazza. This is huge. Only the human rights abuses that we commit are the ones that actually cause retaliation against the United States. When we turn a blind eye, they retaliate. When we're not in the region, they won't. When we actually cause the government to be more abusive, they retaliate. When we aren't the one doing it, they won't. That's why we're the ones linking to actual and increasing terrorism in the long term. But remember, their entire solvency is predicated on the idea that military capability is what actually causes the increase in terrorism. But Sobek tells you that that isn't true because Bossi tells you that you need troop legitimacy.
Okay, we'll be taking we've used 44, which is a minute 16 remaining. We'll be taking. Okay. So you guys ready? Well ready. Yeah. That's ready. So I'm gonna do is address those like overview things we're talking about, as what Will said in the summary, and then go to those issues again. Okay? They like to repeat that ISIS is collapsing the status quo, and by doing that, they're entirely ignoring the responsibilities, which is that we've only taken out the low-hanging fruit, and if we actually want to wipe ISIS out of the heartland, we do need ground troops. Then they give you this new response in the final focus, is saying that Sunni tribes are already rising up and is going to be stopping them. But they ignores the entire purpose of our first intention, specifically says that all Sunni tribes want to rise up, and they're trying to, they aren't organized enough to actually succeed. As a result, that isn't offense for them. That's what the main place you should be casting your ballot off of is going to be the failed state, because as James Piazza explains, and they never respond to that when you have a failed state, see 10 to 15 times more transnational terrorism. This outweighs their analysis from Troy, outweighs their analysis from Neumeyer, outweighs their analysis from Lyle and Reagan, because even if you see smaller pieces in terrorism after the United States intervene, to the point where that's significantly less than what would happen if the United States not intervened at all, means that any probability in the reduction of a failed state constitutes acting in our best interest. That's the main way you should be casting affirmative ballot, how we can prevent these failed states and prevent these atrocities. Now, if you respond to this by saying we don't have these moral interests, yet they ignore the fact that just because we don't act morally in the status quo doesn't mean we ought to the point where this is an a priori for peace, even if we're just trying to reduce genocides are more than enough for you to affirm. Then they say that refugees will attack ISIS, not the United States. But they ignore the fact that it's not the refugees who become the terrorists, except by destabilizing the host state, create a power vacuum where other terrorist groups can flourish. Then they say that military power does not equal success, but as Will points out, that's only the done analysis. And they drop the Crane analysis, so when you directly conflict the perpetrator, you reduce anti-civilian killings by 17%, and Western, who's the most important, who says that we don't even need to completely succeed. But just by targeting the ISIS, they can no longer focus on killing civilians, and thus we stop this genocide. The reason why this outweighs all their analysis is one, it outweighs their Pexit analysis and corruption, because as Will points out, the only reason why Iraq can get away with it, because they justify it as the way to stop terror, and we solve it with terrorism. This outweighs their analysis, all their increased terrorism analysis, to the point where we're stopping a failed state. This outweighs all analysis to the point which is the strongest link to the United States interest, because not only does transnational terrorism harm the United States, it also harms the very world order that ensures our hegemony and our power. Because by preventing a failed state comes only with an affirmative ballot. We urge you to affirm. Thank you.